we're working on negative and positive space evaluation. And this is a technique that allows you to compare shapes from non-space, which we call negative space, which is an object space, and how that interacts or kind of jigsaw puzzles in with positive space. So if I want to draw this tripod lamp here, I could use a variety of techniques, but one thing that really helps with that is to really look at the shape analysis that's happening in between, in the non-space areas, right? In the negative space areas. So the first drawing that I'm going to do, I'm going to really focus in on the relationship of these open areas. I want to define those first and not really focus in on the actual space of the object itself. It's important to close one eye when you do this. That way you can flatten the form into a shape, right? I also like to put these, like the reason I have this set up in a window in a dark room is so that I can look at these more as silhouette. So I try to think about it as basically like out here being either white or black, and then the subject itself being the opposition of that. So I'm going to focus in on this lamp here. It really helps for my first drawing. I'm going to do a negative space drawing first, right? So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be leaving my negative space white on my paper, and I'm going to be blackening in my positive space. So the first thing I'm going to do is kind of close one eye, and I'm going to trace around in space those shapes that I see in the window that are not subject areas. So I'm just focusing purely on shape analysis here. Some of the areas and details, like in here, where we have a lot of openings in the positive space or the subject space, these can be really tricky to make them look right when we focus on the subject itself. And so by focusing on these areas instead, I can make sure that I get those areas correct. And that can help me to realize the correct proportions and the correct object area that I'm trying to draw. So, okay. And I have this situation with our window here where it's kind of bordered off. I think what I'm going to try to do is just ignore that and just focus in on where the area of non-object exists there. So now that I've kind of worked with that, I'm going to step back and close one eye again, and I'm going to trace in space, just working my pencil around, very similar to blind contour, or the step that we do before blind contour where we actually trace the contours that we see. Okay, get a good feel for that. I'm going to create a frame of reference up in here. So we've been using viewfinders to do that. And it can be very helpful for you to place a viewfinder over this and actually trace out that space that you see if you need help figuring out how to get this proportion to this. So I think what I'm going to do is just create a mark across the top. That's going to be my limitation for the very top of my composition. That's going to be where the top of this lamp is ending. I'm going to create another limitation down here, and that's going to be the limitation for the area that this leg down here will stop. It's going to help me kind of frame everything in. And there's that case happening right over here too. I think I'm going to try to get that where I have a limitation happening there. I'm not going to worry about the other side right now. So I may use pencil siding. I may use a variety of different ways to try to get these shapes worked out. Since I have this going on the top, I'm just going to evaluate the triangular shape that I see in there right now. So I'm just trying to draw a space in there that really articulates the negative. I'm not focused in on the positive at all. I'm just evaluating what that shape looks like in the negative. So I'm kind of following. I'm looking at the light areas, and I'm kind of gesturing because that's something that really works for me. Let's see, kind of starting to get lost here a little bit, so I'm going to go ahead and look at this shape around it, because I am going to clean this up, right? Now I'm working with the area in between, like where that knob is, and kind of where it joins in between some of the spots where there's a pivot on this thing. So I'm just looking carefully at those shapes and spaces. Let me come in just a little bit because that's what I see there. So for me, it really helps to think about this very abstractly. Again, I don't want to think about my subject so much. I want to think about the spaces that exist around my subject. And that's what I really want to get right. Okay, so that looks pretty good in there. So I'm evaluating this space in here. See what's happening there. Kind of looks like I have kind of a strange thing happening down here. I'm going to follow this up to here. Let's see, and then I have a skinny, kind of a skinny shape happening here. Stop about there, that looks about right. And then I'm going to go ahead and open up all this space. I've got a good deal of space open in there. I'm kind of looking at the grass in that area. It's kind of hard for me to try to omit the black spots of the window. If that's hard for you, go ahead and include those. You know, if it's dark, think of that as positive space that you would simply not evaluate. You would evaluate the space around it. So if I were doing this the other way, I might want to gesture like the middle of this chord rather than the edges of the chord. Kind of goes off into this area here. And again, I'll clean this up later so I can get some good, crisp, clean lines happening there. So let's see. That's kind of where that window goes. So now I'm going to go inside and around this area here. I have found that focusing on negative space helps me a lot with complex forms like this because it takes me out of that need to represent the positive. And usually my positive space, once I do that, shows me a very objective rendering, kind of in a silhouette manner, of what the subject that I'm trying to draw looks like, and it comes out quite well. Sometimes if I'm having trouble with the gesture type drawing, I'll go back to this and really focus in on these spots here. Some good subjects for this would be like a complicated house plant with a lot of spaces in between, so that you're not thinking so much about leaves as you are thinking about the space around the leaves. I'm kind of have to truncate this a little bit because I started large, so I'm just going to let my drawing go off the page here. This would have been a good time for me to probably use the viewfinder because that would have helped me to maintain the proportion of what I'm drawing within my pictorial space. I'm kind of checking out this little triangular area and where that's going to go. Sometimes I'll trace, sometimes I'll get like an angle and bring it over just to make sure that I'm getting that angle correct. Okay. And then there's kind of a repetition happening there. Little area in here. Okay, I kind of got lost there, so I'm just gonna go over that and I'll correct it later. So I'm kind of getting to this spot here. And things are getting a lot more complex on this area because I have overlapping of these different like metal elements. So I'm just gonna go slowly and make sure that I get each shape in the right spot. So with that leg kind of going behind the other, I'm using a series of different triangles that I see inside of there to try to make this look more correct. Another good subject for this would be like a stool with a lot of legs, like 4 legs on it. And that would help you also to look at those spaces in between rather than the actual stool itself. So now I can bring this down. And I'm kind of looking at opposing areas here because I know that there's something on this side, there's going to be something on the other side, and that's kind of how I'm dictating this. But the little tripod thing on there that I'm seeing, it's more complex than it would be for me to just draw this with gesture in the positive, so it's helpful for me to look at all those little nuances of those contours. Okay, I'm going to bring this off here. Those kind of join up. And again, I'm just going to like have this go off the page since I kind of messed up some of my proportion here. I kind of see a little bit of this thing coming down over here. Again, you know, very handy way to look at more complex elements. I'm going to follow that down. I'm going to let that go off the page as well. Okay, so I feel like I have a pretty good reference here. What I do now is I clean this up, right? So I've got a lot of different lines on here. Some are correct, some are incorrect. So I'm going to reevaluate my subject, and I'm going to darken in the stuff that I think is correct. I actually like to go straight to Sharpie with this, but I go kind of slower than I do with the gesture. The 50-50 continuous edge assignment, like where we go back and forth from here to here, is a really good way to use Sharpie so that you can kind of correct your marks as you're going along. If you're not confident with this, then just go ahead and use your pencil and darken this area so that you can kind of clean up the other stuff later. And I'm seeing some stuff that I missed before, like there's a little knob thing coming off of that. I'm also kind of seeing that maybe, oh, I see what happened there. Okay, so that's some of that. Okay, so there is a chord that's going way back there. I'm being pretty deterministic with my contours here. And I can always shave more off. Like if I didn't do this correct, I can always cut more off by darkening it. I'm seeing that maybe this knob thing could have been a little bit bigger too. So I'm kind of making those corrections now. Again, I'm not worried about anything on the inside of this subject whatsoever. I'm just worried about the contour at this point and really articulating that negative space. So really the end result will be a silhouette of your subject. I think I maybe have this a little bit more angled than I see it. It's pretty straight actually. Trying not to stylize this stuff. I'm trying to stay as close to the subject as possible. So those two chords kind of like stick together at this point and they create an overlap. Okay, so I'm going to continue this. And for the negative space drawing, I want you to leave the negative space white. That way we can emphasize through contrast on that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start working on darkening in my positive space. just want to flatten that completely off. And when I'm doing this, I will look at my contours again, like a third time, just to make sure that this looks like, these shapes look like the shapes that I see happening in between. The reason I like to blacken in the positive space for this is because it kind of belies the silhouette that we're looking at already. We don't really care about the details inside of this. We care about the relationship of these shapes out here to this. So if you have a composition that has a lot of black space in it, you probably don't want to waste a huge amount of Sharpie on that. So a lot of times what I'll do there is I'll just kind of get my contours cleaned up, and they look a lot like my object, and then I'll go in here with India ink and a brush, and I'll just go ahead and blacken that in. So I am going to finish up this little spot down here to give a good look or a good example for how it should look when you're completed. Definitely don't use a micron pen on this. You're going to blow through your micron pen fast. Of course, at the end, you're going to want to get rid of any of your pencil marks, so the image itself just represents your analysis of the negative versus the positive space here. Be respectful about those white spaces in there, because that's what I care about on this one. Yep, already running out. Good thing I have another one. Go back and take a look at that. Yeah, it's much sharper than I've drawn it, so I'm going to make that correction now. So of course your Sharpie is going to bleed through the sulfite paper. I have a second piece of paper under it. It's a good idea to protect your surface when you're working, so you don't have to clean all this off later. Okay, yeah, that bump looks about right. That space looks about right inside. Articulate this guy here. I'm not feeling very confident about that nice straight line, so I just kind of did a few practice marks on the inside and then work my way out, somewhat similar to what we do for mass drawing. And truly, this is a mass drawing, but we're not dealing with necessarily solid shapes. I want you to select stuff, object-wise, that has little openings in it so that you can compare those shapes one against the other. So your negative space drawing, essentially, the negative will be completely white, right? And this should belie high objectivity to what you have within your silhouette.